guest. Jasmine Mans is a Black American poet, artist from Newark, New Jersey. She graduated from the University of Wisconsin Madison with a BA in African American Studies. Her debut collection of poetry, Chalk Outlines of Snow Angels, was published in 2012. Mans is the resident poet at the Newark Public Library, and she was a member of the Strivers Row Collective. Mans will be in conversation with Jasmine Carr, a writer, illustrator, and poet living on unceded Stolo territory. Her writing, which explores the theme of feminism, womanhood, social justice, and love, acts as a means of healing and reclaiming identity. As a spoken word artist and creative writing facilitator, she has toured across North America, the UK, and Australia to connect with youth through the power of artistic expression. Her debut poetry and prose collection, When You Ask Me Where I'm Going, and her sophomore novel, If You Tell the Truth, are both available. Please give our guest a virtual round of applause.
Hello, I am so grateful to be in community with everybody here tonight. I am so excited to be talking to Jasmine Mans about her poetry collection, Black Girl Call Home. If I had my physical copy here, I would be waving on the screen, but I have my digital copy instead. And I cannot tell you like how beautiful this collection is. If you haven't already read it, you need to start reading now because I spent all of last night like crying over it. I'm so grateful to be talking to Jasmine today. So Jasmine, thank you first of all for like being in conversation and community with me tonight. I could not be more honored to be speaking to someone who, interestingly enough, like I've been following for nearly a decade. Um, a little bit of like cheesy poet storytelling. When I was a 19-year-old like baby poet, I remember sitting in the library at my university when I should have been probably writing an essay and just like scrolling through YouTube and watching spoken word poems by so many amazing poets who I admire so deeply. And I vividly remember like sitting in the library and running into your Nicki Minaj poem and just like stopping in my tracks because your voice and like the honesty with which you spoke and the truth you spoke were like so heart-stoppingly beautiful. And there was something about like your cadence and your tones and your emotion and that those quiet like moments in your poems that just stole my heart. So to be sitting here a decade from then talking about your book is like the most beautiful thing in the world to me, and the universe works in such mysterious ways, and I am grateful. So on that note, I wanted to ask you, just to open up this space, what has that creative journey been like for you to get here, to hold this baby book in your hands, and at its core, what is the story that Black Girl Call Home tells?
Well, first, Jasmine, thank you for being here. I'm super excited and thank you for all of you guys for tuning in and listening to us. Um, it's crazy to be here, right? Like, I remember some of my first poetry shows. I was like, me and my friends had a poetry group in Newark, and we would perform at nursing home talent shows. We would get $20 a piece, and that was our like high school hustle so that we had lunch money. And that money would get me sometimes to the city so that I can compete against the New York City kids. And if you can like beat the New York City kids in poetry and doing slam poetry, you were going to do something. And so, like, to know that those little moments, right, that I had as a girl, and we're talking like when you mention poems like the Nicki Minaj poem, we are talking like 10, 11 years ago. And so to be still received as a poet today is a testament of the work of God and the journey and the commitment and the love that I am just honored to engage in with our art form, because like poetry's hard, right? it's an emotional journey. And I get why people don't want to dive into this space. And so to know that poetry stuck with me and that I stuck with it, it feels like an honor, and I'm grateful, and I'm still in shock. Like, you know, when you're in the work of it, you don't really, you're not stepping back to be like, wow. And so I'm still really, really shocked by how this is being received, and the fact that it's my baby, and the fact that many people work together to render this blessing true. And I learned that the poems, the narrative is just the beginning of it, right? So.
Yeah, and I love how you describe that poetry stuck with me and I stuck with poetry. Um, so what would you say is like that's if I know there's so many different beautiful themes in the book, but what would you say at its core is the story of Black Girl Call Home?
Ooh. Okay, so I finally got it. It's the moment when you get dropped off, and the person who is dropping you off in the car says, call me when you get in the house.
Yep.
It's that. It's I'm gonna wait for you to call me when you get in the house. That I love you that much. I'm gonna be there when you get home. And that's what I want people to feel about this book, The Intention. There are many themes, right? Many themes under the umbrella of what it means for me to be not just a woman, but a Black woman, and not just a Black woman, but a queer Black woman. And so we're talking about all of like the intersections that we study in college, and we're putting creative narrative to them. But like, we're not sitting here like, I'm writing under the themes of blah, blah, blah. No, I'm digging into myself, and I found some things, and I asked some questions, and we got somewhere, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like how you describe it is exactly what it is. Like it's that call home, it's that embrace that you feel in the form of pages, in the form of like a friend, and in the form of a book. That is what this book feels like to me. There's like a tenderness there, and also like a fierce love there. And it's all put together. And even the cover, like that's what the cover tells me. It's like got that tenderness and the fierceness, but I'll get into that later. I'm just in love with the cover. So I'm a poet as well. And as a poet, as a spoken word poet, oral storytelling traditions like spoken word have been so dear to my heart for years and years and years, ever since I first discovered poetry. And there's just something to me about being in a space with someone who is pulling a poem out of their body and like sharing it with us out loud. We feel it, we feel all those feelings in real time, and get to have the honor of being able to hold those words within ourselves as well. And simultaneously, it's such a beautiful experience to be able to physically hold a book in your hands, to like be able to touch the words, to read and absorb at your own in your own way, at your own pace. And I think both mediums of storytelling and like forms of storytelling are so important and so beautiful. So I am generally just so intrigued by the creative process of writers who begin as poets, and who have their heart deeply embedded into spoken word poetry. I'm curious about like what that writing process was like for you writing this book, in relation to how you write spoken word. Was it where, did you write differently than you would when you were writing something that is meant to be performed on stage? And what was that like for you?
Yeah, there are some poems that render themselves to sound, right? Like when we talk about beat poetry, or when we talk about poetry that has the intention to color words, and they want to live in the mouth. And so I do have that experience with words where it's about the rhythm of it. And I realized, I was like, what do you like so much about this? And I was like, oh, it's the way the bees sit in my mouth, the way my tongue moves, the way I can hold these words. And so spoken word allows us to have that engagement, that experience, that oneness, and then also getting comfortable with the page. I was partially intimidated by the page, like coming up, especially because I I always thought I was good at spoken word, and I was a bit intimidated by the page because I was like, oh, maybe I don't have to be good at that right now. But then the page has its own relationship. Like I watched a friend of mine in a poetry workshop, and she did something very specific with the periods, where like even though there were words, a period, and more words, it was almost like a run-on sentence. When you saw it, these things were connected, even though the period establishes that it was the end of a sentence, it wasn't. But she couldn't speak that lesson to us. We had to see it. And so there are two different forms of engagement, and they're both really beautiful experiences to have. And in the book, you see both. You see poems that you read and you read it fast in your head, and you have that moment of peace. And then there are moments where you see the rhythm because you see those similarities in the letters, and maybe you do find it in you to read it out loud, and it builds upon itself. And so I'm lucky to indulge in all of the experiences.
Yeah, and I remember like just like literally last night I was reading, like I wanted to just start reading out loud in the middle of the night. I think there's one poem that you even have that says read aloud. And I just think it's exactly that. It's those rhythmic words, like the euphony, the pauses, the intensity of language spoken out loud, that is so beautiful. And I am also so intrigued by like exactly like what you said, that sense of intimidation that we sometimes feel moving from the mic to the physical page. And I think that sometimes oral storytelling traditions are, for whatever reason, like for whatever sort of like oppressive like structure exists in the world, oral storytelling traditions are sometimes devalued in relation to what is physically on the page. And I think that's like the most unfortunate thing ever because there is so much to be gained from like folk storytelling traditions, and the storytelling traditions of our ancestors, that were often oral storytelling.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm happy you bring that up. Like I remember when I was younger in college, I used to go to this reservation in South Dakota, and they didn't have strong electricity, and one of the main forms of communication and just storytelling was through the radio. And we're talking like we're in 2014, right? And the radio is the most significant way to engage, and it's an elder, and he is storytelling to the community to who can access it, right? And because of oppression, right, that there are
Mhm.
certain narratives that are not documented properly, or not documented by the people that deserve to document their own stories. And so we have to honor both like the oral tradition, right, how it has lasted, how voice has carried us for so long, and then the idea of like, I think it's something to say about like, there was a time where like people, especially like Black folks, were not allowed to read and write, and a lot of engagement came by way of memory and song. And
Yeah.
so even though because we couldn't always write these words, to remember those words were of value. And so memory and song, and the way song allows memory, poetic thought, is the ways of which we found freedom, right? We can write that
Yeah.
you
Yes. It's so beautiful that we get to like decolonize through all of these creative practices, through the mic, through what's on paper, through our books that are now taking up space where they traditionally weren't allowed to take up space. It's a beautiful, it's a beautiful coming home to self, I think. So going
know.
back to, sorry, go on.
Amen.
So going back to the cover, which I'm obsessed with, and I've been obsessed with ever since you revealed it on social media. Um, like I said, there's just something so tender and strong about the cover, and something so honest as well. And I don't know how to articulate it. It's just a feeling I have in my gut. And I would love to hear from you about where the title came from, where the cover art came from, what that creative process was like, and what did you feel when that final cover was chosen?
When we first started building the book, this wasn't the cover. It was a cover similar. It was the head of a Black girl, a child, and it was a photograph piece. And it wasn't this piece, but it was a piece that I knew was special to me. I thought it was beautiful. But I always knew of this second piece, the piece that is now the cover. And it was always the piece that no matter what cover I was shown, I was like, but what about this piece? And they were like, well, what about these 80,000 covers? And I was like, yeah, but what about this one here? And I kept saying these words, Black girl nostalgia. I wanted to deliver Black girl nostalgia. And I love art. I love visual art. And I'm a consumer. And so I started digging in just about every artist that I ever loved or knew of. Um, and studying and thinking about what I want people to feel. I remember like sitting every poetry book in my house on the floor and just looking at books, right? And then printing out all of the covers that I would even think about for mine and seeing like how it felt next to another cover. And I knew I wanted something beautiful, and I knew that this cover that I saw it on my brown box in maybe 2018 or 19, and I saved it and I reposted it, and I always remembered that it was the most beautiful piece, and it was always a dream. Like if I could have my dream, and the thing about like Berkeley and Random House and my great agents and my publisher, is that they have rendered me this beautiful opportunity to think big and to be outlandish. And so when someone sits in front of you and say, well, what is your dream? And if you had to be boundless, then where would you go? And so I took that on, and I think we've been using that method from beginning to end. We knew that this was the cover, and we played around with many options, and we considered many different forms of art. We considered text. We considered like, what if the words were engraved, and what if it was a telephone, and so many different things. And we kept going back here because this was the cover. This was the cover.
Yeah. And I love how you describe it as like a sense of boundlessness, like what can be created when we are given that space, and given that trust to be able to push all those boundaries and try everything and find exactly the right piece that belongs on the cover. And that I feel is what that cover looks like to me. It's that boundlessness explored, until perfection was found. Not to be intense, if that's really what it feels like to me.
Right.
And yeah, and as I think about the title, we reflect on this concept of home. And as I was moving through the book, it sometimes felt like I was on this journey to confront home, and also to leave home, and also to call home, like the title implies. And it was all of that in one, and all of that explored in different ways. And all of it was valid, that leaving and that coming home as well. And that really, like, it really rung true to me, with my own experiences. Um, so for that reason, I'm just curious about, what home means to you, and what its significance is in Black Girl Call Home.
In Black Girl Call Home, home takes on multiple forms because home is the body, right? But home is also my mama's house in the South Ward, and home is Newark. But home is also the tribe of women that you represent. And so we have to peel back the layers of all the different dynamics of what home is. And then I just engaged in the way that was most sincere to me. And so right now, if my body is home, I'm going to think of the first time that like my body ever engaged in sex, and I'm going to think about my mom giving birth to me. I'm going to think about my brown skin. I'm going to think about a concept of beauty and ugly. And so, and that's just all coming from my body, right, being home. And so if we were like workshopping this in poetry workshop, it's like, well, what does home represent if it is you? And those things are simple. And so my mom is just the second idea that comes to mind when you think of home, right? Because like she was in the home that raised you, and you are the person that came from her. And then that becomes a wealth of things that you must explore and dig into. And so home is just a journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you talk about like motherhood and your mother, as I was reading, I was thinking about my own relationship with motherhood in the stories I tell and the poems I write, and you know, those poems that dig into places in myself that can be a lot sometimes. Sometimes the page feels like that space of healing when I get to write those stories of family and motherhood, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, it's invasive. um and I would love to hear about like what it felt like for you, to kind of dig into those like places in your heart writing the book. Like, did you meet any resistance when you explored those themes, whether internally like within yourself or like externally around you?
I know my parents are the only ones with keys to my apartment, and I remember they stopped by here to drop something off when I wasn't home, and all of the pages to the book were like on the wall in my bedroom. And my mother called me and she was like, that poem about the da 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 da, can you not add da 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 da? I won't tell you guys what it was, but it made her uncomfortable, and I took it out, because I want my mother and the women in my life to feel honored by this book, and also hosting the complications, right? Like there's a piece in the book, like the first time the Black girl calls her mother a bitch, or so you're gonna be a dyke now, and like these moments that like are real between my mother and I, but also hosting the love and the honor of like, oh no, you kept this family together, and what does your body feel like? And just considering that of like just stopping for a moment and saying like, what does it mean for a woman to give birth, and then to give birth to me, and then thinking as a selfish daughter about like how like motherhood is a traumatic experience that is evergreen. And to the fact, and so I wanted to unpack so much, and you see the joy, and you see the hardness, and you see all of it, enough of it, essentially.
Yeah, and it's all of that in one, which is the most like true to real life thing about those pieces to me. Like, it's everything. It's the good, the bad, the painful, the beautiful, um, and just the honesty of it all. That there is still love, beneath all of it and above all of it, around all of it,
Mhm.
which really really spoke to me. So switching gears a little bit, as we begin to close up the space, I shared earlier that you were one of my first inspirations, when I was becoming a poet. So I would love to hear from you about, you know, which writers and artists you look to for inspiration when you're writing.
All right, so got something here. Don't get me wrong, forgiveness and I are well acquainted, but just because she had good intentions, it doesn't mean she ever kept me safe. Um, you are one of the poets that I engage with, and I got your book not a few years ago. What was it, a year ago? Maybe I got
Yeah, I
it.
think it would have been a year ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I folded down like all, you can't really see. But I folded down so many pages, and you have so many long pieces. But experiencing your book was also very, very emotional. And you see, I don't even have the cover on it because I'm just brutal when it comes to books. But I love short form poetry. Like, I picked up Rupi's book the other day, and it just threw me in a wealth of sadness. And um, I love Toni Morrison, and when I'm searching for descriptive language, I feel like you can indulge in anything Toni Morrison and find your way. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Wong was like one of the most beautiful pieces I've ever read in my life. Like, God, Lee is just gorgeous. Um, but yeah, I'm searching for everything. I'm trying to read The Vanishing Half. I'm like, I'm trying to read it, but like everything is happening. But my goal is to like find a bathtub in the world and go and read that book. um but I think there's a good time for there's so many good pieces that are out, so many good literary pieces. Nate Marshall wrote Finna, um, and Roya Marsh just released a book. And so I'm a book hoarder as well. And so I have more books than I'm ever going to read. However, yeah, anything Toni Morrison, and I'll throw up a good poetry book and engage one anytime.
I love all of that. And I love that short form poetry speaks to you so meaningfully, because it does to me as well. And there is just something to be said about, those two-line poems that just like hit you right in the gut and go straight for the jugular, and speak directly to your heart, in so few words.
Those are like the bullets. It's like
Yeah.
you can stab and carve, but you need something that's sharp, something that is direct, something that hits. And so I'm learning that the craftsmanship of a long form poem takes the same kind of carefulness and thoughtfulness as those one lines, because we don't you don't need to waste language, right? And that's what we learn in college. Like, your professors are like, we don't need all of that extra. Don't. And so when we write short form, it's like, don't waste language.
Don't waste language. That is like everything that I try to like encapsulate, or what I've been learning in my master's program, quite literally. So that speaks to me very directly with like what I've been working on recently. Um, so going off of that, this is a bit of like an emotional question, but for that little Black girl out there in the world right now who is holding Black Girl Call Home in her hands, ready to crack open its pages for the first time, what do you hope that she will take away from reading that book?
Somebody's waiting for her. She's not alone. Um, that that yeah, that
Yeah, and that is quite literally what I feel holding that book, reading it. That feeling of being in community, of being, in my bedroom, but like not being isolated, and being held and being cared for. It's a beautiful feeling. So before we end off, I would love it if you could read us a poem from the book, a poem that is speaking to you in this moment, deeply.
um I wanted to perform a love poem, because my love poems make me happy and make me feel joy. Let's find one. Okay. And you know the worst part about being a spoken word poet, it's like, should I like pretend to read a poem that I have memorized, that like I know I'm in love with already because I've said it to myself 1,000 times. Um, this is on page 155, and it's called The Light. Um, it's the poem that I wrote when I imagined what love should feel like. And so here it is. Stared at a picture of Dorothy Dandridge and Harry Belafonte. Wondered if we still fight the same or bite the same. If they ever made more love than sense. If they ever stared at our generation and just wondered where all the fireflies went. Did they all die, or did they just not find us worth the light? Did they not find us worthy enough of them dressing to the nines in their shine, waiting to become falling stars between the hands of a blushing girl, in front of another waiting to give up her audacity and her world? I promise you, if I died tonight in these sheets, I would still want you next to me. Like this love survived all of those riots. I know when you are scared, I held your hand when the hurricane came. Pass me my lighter. I'm sorry I made you cry. I don't give a fuck if you cry. I will always wipe your tears when you cry. And I know you did not give me permission to. But I already started asking God about you. I told him if he doesn't mind, I'd like to make it to heaven before you do, to run your bath water and to make you a plate, to turn your TV to your favorite channel, then turn it off and make you believe that you left it that way. And I vow to never to open the door for a scent other than yours. And I promise to always remember your scent, and that we will laugh at everything that hurt when we were humans, like when we were poor and when we slept on our bedroom floor on Leslie Street, and when we only had water and grilled cheese. And the moment you said, baby, I may not have any money, but I got a soft spot and a melody and a pair of arms that could rock you to sleep. So you thinking about taking a chance on me? That's the light, and it makes me feel happy.
That's my favorite poem from the book. I'm so happy that you read it. I was like, oh my goodness, that is I quoted it last night and shared it with a loved one. So I'm so happy that you shared that one. So on that note, I just want to say thank you for having this conversation with me tonight. I'm so grateful to be in this space with you, and hopefully one day we can do this in person. And from here, we're going to pass the floor over to Politics and Prose, to Morgan at the bookstore, who's going to facilitate a Q&A with the audience for us.
Jasmine, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Jasmine. That was a great conversation you all had. And thank you, Jasmine Mans, for reading that poem. So I'm going to start reading the Q&A questions. And of course, during this time, if you still have a question, go ahead and drop it in the Q&A box. So I'm going to start with the first one. What advice would you give to a Black girl or woman who is afraid to call home because maybe there's no embrace?
Prayer, right? I think that I'm learning to seek different forms of prayer as well as seeking different forms of therapy. I'm also learning stillness. And so if we're afraid to do anything, especially like calling home because we feel like no one is there, then don't call yet. Wait, practice stillness, and analyze the fear of what can happen when we call home, who answers and who does not answer, and acknowledging that we can mourn things that are not good, and we can mourn things, we can mourn the people that will not answer, and still rebuild home, and still be deserving of a home.
All right, so I hope I pronounced this person's name right. Hi, my name is Ariana Murrell, and I am 13 and an aspiring political activist. You really inspire me. What advice would you give to a younger baby poet?
Yes, younger baby poet. My advice to you is continue on. That I think Jay-Z said it. I'm sorry. I don't know if you can hear the charm of living in the city. Um, I think Jay-Z said it best. He said, like, don't quote me, but like the reason why I'm great is because I didn't quit. And I was like, is that the key to success? To just not give up, because sometimes we establish, if we don't do things well the first few times, that it's not for us, but not saying that it's so for me that I'm going to do it bad all the time. And so I think, and then remember the playfulness as a baby poet, that there are certain things that you just don't know. So you don't have to subscribe to them. And so remember the freedom that you feel, and try to find a playfulness and a carelessness that when we talk about Black women in literature and politics, there is no playfulness. And then to indulge truly in the craft, right? And to stay here for so long, we must engage in the joy in it. And so as we speak about so much mourning, and as we hold ourselves literally accountable, if that's a thing, to so many hard dynamics, we must be that adamant about joy. And so allow play and joy to be a practice and keep on keeping on.
Right. Our next question is from Nick George. What was the hardest poem to get out for this book?
I wouldn't even tell you. I couldn't even tell you that. That's such a secret. Um, there's some hard ones though, and you'll see them, you'll feel them, because whichever ones felt hard to read are probably the ones that were hard to write.
Nice. That's a good answer. All right. So Craig Burke asks, of the poems that made it into Black Girl Call Home, which was the first you decided to include? And this kind of double backs on the other question. And which was the hardest to include?
I wanted to include the light. I wanted to include the love poems. I wanted to include the poem about my mom's mac and cheese because I remember writing that piece in college, and my professor and my classmates workshopping this poem about my mom's mac and cheese. And I workshopped this poem for a very, very long time. And this poem has been just, every time I think about my mom and poetry, I think about this poem. And my mother makes mac and cheese often. It's a staple when we're in celebration, right? My best friend Kawan is in the chat laughing at us. But he's had my mom's mac and cheese. And so it's this energy. And so when in honoring my mother, I wanted to include that as well. And and so I knew I wanted to include footnotes for Kanye because I was so excited to actually have the footnotes in the text. And that's when we're talking about Jasmine Page poetry, where it's just like, you can't actually show the footnotes when you're performing. And so I knew that there was something that I wanted to deliver in the performance of footnotes for Kanye, but also in the written text. And I was so excited to engage that. And then the hard poems were just the hard poems, you know?
So this next question is from anonymous attendee. Can you talk a bit about your writing process, and has the pandemic changed it at all?
My writing process, I believe, takes on different forms depending on the poem, right? And so sometimes there is a very scholarly approach that you take when you're writing, where it's just like, I'm going to study, I'm going to take notes, I'm going to write for this amount of time, I'm going to edit through the work. And sometimes your emotions are removed from the engagement of the poem. Sometimes your emotional self is strictly writing the poem, so much so that you're everywhere. And then sometimes, like we were talking previously, beat is important. And so I'm not necessarily writing with I'm writing with a focus on rhythm, with a focus on the letters, and with a focus on sound. And so that process might be more vocal than the other processes that I have. And so I think when we talk about the writing process, it can vary depending on like how we have to approach the poem. I think it's almost like a house Whereas like depending on what you're dealing with, that tells you how you should enter the house. You have the standard way of going into the front door, but sometimes you got to enter the back. And depending on what we're approaching, you might have to enter in through the window. If you got a big ass house, you might have a side house, you might enter through the basement. But there's different ways of entering in the story and engaging. And once we know that, it's almost like our emergency exits. We can always get in, we can always get out. But it's beauty, right? And being able to enter and exit in multiple ways.
All right, this next question is from D Key. Do you think it's possible to define poetry?
Why is his name slipping me? I always talk about him. A poet said he teaches a master class and he says, poetry is the history of the heart. And so I think that's how you define poetry. It's the history of the heart.
This next question, I'm going to summarize it a little bit, but it's from Anonymous. How did you incorporate your family and Newark culture, folklore into your poetry and prose so seemingly effortlessly, because it must have taken effort?
Oh, it took a ton of effort. And I think it's my home. And so it's the language that I think the effort part is honoring, right? It's like you go to the University of Wisconsin Madison, you study poetry all your life, you exist in an ecosystem that tells you that your language is unworthy. The people who speak your language are unworthy, and you realize that the brilliance is not in mastery and knowing Shakespearean language or Western literature, but to literally write your mama like she sounds and to literally write your brother how he sounds and be able to describe the cigarette smell and the texture of the bus that you get on when you're going from Leslie Street to Penn Station. That's my job. That is our jobs to be able to write as is, to be able to see things, decipher, and put it in text. And I legit and so when it comes to this book, I just wanted to honor what I knew. And the hardest part was growing up and saying, oh, this is valuable. Not only am I valuable, but my mom was valuable. And everybody should know about the mac and cheese and about Lyons Avenue and all of these. But to really think that you are valuable is, I think, the hardest feat here.
And it does look like that person left their name. That was from Taryn in Napa Valley. All right, so the next question from Yannick Love. It says, as soon as I learned of Newark poets and the open mics at City Hall, COVID hit. Do you all plan to host any virtual or small open mic events?
Man, we do. I've been talking often about just wanting to go to Military Park. Shout out to whomever this is. They're probably from Newark, but like I want the spring to come because I was just gonna tell people like just meet me in the park, stay 6-7 feet away, and let's just write together. Newark poets love to bond over writing and performing, and the community there is so strong, and I'm a product of that community. And so yeah, we need some moments. Me and Jasmine was talking about this. We need to see people perform.
Tierra Walker asks, one song that reminds you of a Black Girl Call Home, your book. So what song reminds you of your book?
Oh, that's a really good question, but I'm gonna be honest. The first thing I thought was "Brown Skin Girl" by Beyonce. Not because it's Brown Skin Girl, but it's when she's like, "You're the most beautiful thing in the world. I'll never trade you for anybody else. I'll never trade you for anything else. And I think with the release of this book with myself, it's claiming myself, holding on, respecting, loving myself, and really being there for myself. Like, we talk about that stuff in theory. And I had to really show up for myself as a woman at a time where my book was showing up in real form. And I had to acknowledge that I would, or get to the point and really believe that I would not trade myself for anything else. And so this is that claiming of like, oh no, you are so worthy. You are so worthy. I'll never trade you for anybody else.
All right, so this next question looks like people in the audience voted for it, and it kind of jumped up top. So I'm gonna go ahead and read it. It's by an anonymous attendee. It says, when you said, I never loved a woman enough to let her go when she asked me to, connecting that potentially to Dear Ex-Lover, can you speak to the realities of having to let go of someone you love romantically?
Okay, feel super trolled. Um, yeah, it's like, it's so many poems in this book that acknowledge all of the women I love. There was a woman that I loved, that I love and I loved years ago. That when I had to take on my stream of consciousness, so many poems came up about her, because she was from New Orleans. And when I think about spices and food, I thought about her, and music made me think about her, and leaving made me think about her. And so in the book, you're going to see, or in that poem in particular, right, is when you hold on to a person because you desire companionship from a person, without the value of respecting that they should leave. And so you hold them out of selfishness and out of the love to let them go. And how that could hurt or spoil someone, spoil a love between two people. And so, so many of my poems engage how I was a bad lover to women, how women left me, and how I felt like everything was sour, and how home can change when a woman leaves home, right? And so one of my partners was the only partner who lived with me, who shared a home with me. And there's a lot of poems about her leaving and what that felt like. You took Sundays. When you left, it felt like I ain't have a Sunday since you left. And moments like that I wanted to put in honor and place in this book.
All right. Next question, also from Anonymous. What did you learn about yourself as a person or as a writer during this writing process?
It's a harsh thing. It's a hard thing to say. I think I said it today. But I got really nervous because I've been writing for such a long time. And and literally, like, I'm 29 years old, and I've known poetry maybe since I was 5, 6 years old, and it's been my thing. So we decided that Jasmine was a poet, and we've been doing it ever since. And it happened, right? And you write before you know a lot of things, right? And you write before you sometimes are wise, and then you think about all of the people who are listening to you. And for one of the first times, I was like, am I saying the right thing? Am I sure? Like, and so now you want to make sure that, like, I really want to make sure that I'm connected to God, or and connected to a clear consciousness, because I'm like, these are not words in the way that I once thought they were. That they do hurt, they do heal, and we have to deal with the duality of that. And I was telling a friend of mine, um, that I have a fear, and the fear that I have, and it's a scary thing to say it out loud, right? But am I writing from the vessel of God or the God complex? Because sometimes when you know that you are so good at something and so sharp at something, um, you're just writing to get what you desire. And so I've written to get women back that I didn't deserve. I've written to win people back. Um, and so when you think about having a tool as powerful as the pen, um, I want to confront myself in the mirror and say, like, make sure that you're writing from the vessel and not out of a complex. That your writing does not render you God, even in your ability to be strong, even when it's your power. And what do you use your power for? And my power is intimately connected to love. And so my poetry, and you'll see it in the writing, is a desperate attempt to get women to love me again, or to apologize to women. And so I think these days I'm just trying to be very aware of my intentions and where they lead. Your intentions could make their way on YouTube and become viral, and you're like, how did I get here? And so I think this book is a stark reminder of the carefulness that we must render, because I want to make sure that I'm saying and doing the right work.
Right. This question is from Awakening, and they live in Essex County. It says, "Peace. Thank you for holding space. What part of you was born from this book, and what does that born part need right now?"
Mm. Um, I grew up with this book, meaning that, like, I think at the beginning of this book, there was like, there was an accountability that I didn't have for my own self, my own body, my own woman. And in the process of this book, I had to grow up. And growing up meant loving myself radically, hugging myself to sleep, talking to myself. Like, I legitimately have conversations with myself as my friend. It meant being a friend to myself, and not theorizing these words, right? Being so good with language that you can manipulate your own self, right? But it was and being good with language that you can manipulate others, but being real, that you have to love yourself and talk to yourself and lead yourself home. If you are in the wilderness, you have to guide yourself home. You can't cry until someone comes for you. You can't consider if you scream loud enough. That no, you have to guide yourself home, and that you can get home. And so, but that takes a level of trust. How many of us, like, don't trust ourselves, and we're just waiting for someone to hold our hand in a comforting enough way and slowly pull us to our destination, because we want to keep our eyes closed and we don't want to be here. And when this book, before, like, right after editing this book, I felt alone, and it was like, oh no, you talked all that shit, find your way home now. Go ahead. And um and I'm getting there. And I took a chance on myself, and we won, y'all. So we did good.
Right. So this question is from Nichelle Wilson. What is your time management self-practice when it comes to craft?
I'm trash. No, Jen might say I'm trash too. That's my publisher. I'm not good with a email or a deadline. Um, and it's a messy experience. My goal is to commit myself to the process of writing as much as I can. And so I know I often say, like, I want to write every day. And sometimes that means only one line of poetry. Sometimes that means, in that commitment to writing every single day, I might have written once that week. But it's one, the desire, and two, also acknowledging that poetry exists for us in many facets, right? And so to dwell in the art form does not always mean putting pen to paper. It means reading, it means listening to music, it means just being in thought and really thinking about like, what's my imagination like how beautiful like is my imagination. And sometimes like if I'm up early, I'll like watch like those Animal Planet episodes on Netflix where like they're talking about the ocean and they're talking about the animals, and the descriptive language is gorgeous, but it's like you get to just see a world that you don't often engage. Like for an hour I'm just going to look at TV and they're going to tell me about everything under the sea. And I'm going to see some colors I've never seen before. And I'm not trying to master anything. I'm just trying to laugh and see and know. And that simplicity is what keeps us fresh in our art form. Just the ability to not try to be great at it, but to be with it, to be in the company of poetry.
All right, so this will probably be our last question, and it seems like a good question to end on. This one is from Sydney Mays. Do you have any advice for poets who's learning for the poet who's learning to take her poems from the page to the stage regarding performance?
Practice is a beautiful thing, because I've realized that practice is practice, but practice is also meditation, right? It's also oneness. That I spit my poems because I enjoy it. Like I'll be in the house alone, and like I was saying, like the rhythm of words, the beat poetry, the language, the beats, the letters, you find your engagement with it. And so one, practice so much that you fall in love, that it becomes not a routine, but a meditation. And then understand what nerves are. Nerves are your nervous system saying you are present to something that is valuable, that is meaningful. And so with that understanding, nerves don't actually leave. And there is a way to engage nervousness and the beauty of performance. That the beauty of performance and a good performer is not the absence of the nervous performer. It's literally both engaging with each other, and the way that you remain in control and not controlled by nerves or controlled by the setting is by practicing, is by making your poem also your meditation.
Nice. That's such a great note to end on. And on the behalf of Politics and Prose, I would like to thank you, Jasmine Mans, for doing your book event here, and Jasmine Carr for being such a great moderator for this event. We just like to remind you that if you'd like to purchase Black Girl Call Home, we encourage you to purchase it from politics-prose.com. And thank you to our audience for joining us, and have a good night and stay well read. Bye, everyone.